is from the Gospel of Thomas, Losion 2. Yeshua says, "If you are searching, you must not stop until you find. When you find, however, you will become troubled. Your confusion will give way to wonder. In wonder, you will reign over all things. Your sovereignty will be your rest." These are the words of the Lord.
Good morning. We are starting a new series today in Reflections, and over the next couple of months, when we have time, we have some guests coming as well that will weave in and out of this, but over the next couple of months, the staff, in their wisdom, thought it would be a brilliant idea for us to share texts or sources of inspiration that didn't make it into the canons of Scripture back in the 4th century or so of our history. And these are not meant to suggest that we want to dishonor the traditional Christian and Hebrew Scriptures that we love in our community, more to say that God surely continues to speak through us and through all of creation. And where is God speaking, and in what unique ways? So we're going to share those things, and of course, the staff in their wisdom decided the new guy should go first, right? So here I am. When this theme came up, it felt really good to me to bring to you the Gospel of Thomas that was just read. And I don't know, how many people have bumped into the Gospel of Thomas on your journey? A few of you, okay. What do you remember about Thomas? So Thomas was a disciple, an apostle of Jesus. Does anybody have a memory, an image that you want to just yell out? Oh, wow. Wow, that was without prompting. Thomas the doubter. Yeah, and in fact, the church has done a disservice to Thomas in the sense that Thomas the doubter was not meant in a complimentary way, shall we say, right? All the other disciples figured it out. They knew and recognized the risen Jesus, and of course Thomas didn't. He doubted. He wanted to see for himself, but of course all the other disciples saw for themselves before they believed, right? And the bottom line is, for Thomas, doubting was an act of faith. We assume in the life of the church that doubting is the opposite of faith. But indeed, the opposite of faith is not doubt. Doubt is the twin sister of faith. Doubt is the path toward faith for many of us. The opposite of faith, if it has one, would be certainty. Surely, if we have certainty of things, there is no need for faith. In fact, no room for faith in our life. The Gospel of Thomas, whether we can attribute it to the disciple Thomas, the doubting one, reflects this posture of faith. It reflects the space given to us, the permission given to us to doubt, to question, to live the questions. It presents a very different Jesus in the process. Einstein once remarked that after the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, everything had changed but our way of thinking. I don't think it's a coincidence, at least to me, that in that same year, in 1945, two Egyptian brothers digging around for fertilizer in an old ancient Egyptian cave bumped into a vessel containing 13 leather-bound books that turned out to be the sacred teachings of the early Christian community. Many of them never been read before. One of these bound books was a profound sacred text called the Gospel of Thomas. Now, we had known about the Gospel of Thomas because we have fragments of it before 1945. But in this vessel, the complete version was contained. And of course, it took about 20 years to get into the hands of scholars because it went on the black market. The brothers weren't silly, They decided to figure out how we could sell this thing. And so it passed from black market to black market, and finally the Egyptian government got their hands on it, and it was given to scholars, and the scholars spent 20 years trying to figure out what it was. Finally, it started seeping out. In the beginning, of course, it was labeled a Gnostic gospel. That was another derogatory term. It was labeled a heresy. It was labeled a different version, a made-up version, a fable even, that was created by a counter-Christian community in the early days in the life of the church. But in recent scholarship, we have learned and come to believe that this is indeed an ancient text of the Christian community. In fact, it was shared quite widely, and it was celebrated by communities as an authentic teaching and voice of Jesus. The text contains itself 150 what they call logians. These are just simply short sayings, and this is the biggest difference with this gospel is that they look and sound like Zen koans more than gospel teachings. Right? They're simple, they're pithy, and they're pointed. And they have nothing to do with the things we've come to know of sacred teachings, like in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They are simply spiritual teachings about our life and our life together. There is no narrative in this gospel. There's no story about the life of Jesus, no angels, no manger, no miracles, no healing stories, no crucifixion. Simply the teachings of Jesus themselves as they emerge from an inner circle of students. Something like lecture notes taken by students sitting at the feet of a master. Inside this gospel, there are some teachings that we would remember or recognize from the other gospels. But there is a core of the teachings that is quite different. Its focus is on conscious attention, present moment awareness, surrender, and the coming to a state of what Thomas calls singleness. That is an invitation to move out of a worldview of duality and into and embracing the world of unitive seeing. That is, becoming and recognizing our undivided self, the connection we have with all living things, with life itself. Cynthia Bourgeault has suggested that the contemporary reemergence of this ancient text has the profound potential for changing the face of Christianity. What makes the Gospel of Thomas so liberating and maybe so threatening is that it spends no time on beliefs. It spends all its time on faith, on who we are, on how we live as people of spirit. So, what do we do with the text? Well, there are many things we can do about it or understand about it. First of all, the question is, why did it take 1,600 years for us to get it back? And there's a lot of answers to that. There's a lot of people that have responded, and different scholars have different opinions about this. But I think we can trace this back, and scholarship is pointing this way, to a very early text. In fact, there are scholars now who are working on the oral tradition of Thomas, suggesting that long before it was written down, it was actually part of an oral tradition in the very first century of the Christian church. And therefore, it could be traced back to Thomas, who, legend has it, after the death and resurrection of Jesus, moved on to places like Syria and India, and could have brought back a more Eastern vision of Jesus' teaching. Whatever the case, we have these powerful, interesting, fascinating sacred texts. So we read one for our reading this morning. If you are searching, you must stop. If you are searching, you must not stop until you find. Now, for those of us in the traditional church, we would recognize this as seek and you shall find. Knock on the door and it shall be answered, right? The problem is that our traditional teachings stop there, and this, of course, doesn't stop, not even at find. When you find, however, you will become troubled. Now, that doesn't sound like good news. What the heck's going on here? We find, we're done, we're good, right? But when we find and we're good, we move into the space we call certainty, right? We know, right? And what Thomas is suggesting to us is the path of transformation doesn't work that way. You and I know that from our own experience when we pay attention. When we find, however, we become troubled. Why? Well, seeking leads to finding, yes, but the result of that finding is typically to plunge us into confusion and disorientation as the new information rattles the cages of our old paradigms, our old way of seeing. If we've truly found something that is life-giving, it can't be the same old. I found Jesus bumper stickers don't work in the Gospel of Thomas, because every time you find, your heart is broken open. Your eyes are called to see things differently. Only gradually we can make room for what Thomas calls wonder. Our confusion will give way to wonder. And in wonder we will reign over all things. That is, we have a new foundation, a new place, a new space to live and work. We see and experience all things differently until we find again, and we go through the cycle all over again. This is the spiral of transformation that Thomas invites us into. In the age of belief that lasted about 1,600 years, we're just moving out of the age of belief. The age of belief repelled this gospel, in part, I think, because it didn't bring us to certainty. It actually brings us to uncertainty, openness, curiosity. All of the practices that in a uniform church, in a church that's about command and control, in a church that's building hierarchies, really isn't looking for. I cannot do this gospel justice in 15 minutes. You know that, right? So I'm gonna give you just a few more tastes. It's like when you go to a wine tasting thing, and they put a few little glasses of wine, just a little smidgen in each glass, so you can still drive afterwards. So I'm just gonna give you a few tastes so you can still drive after this service. All right? Jesus says, a person of advanced age must go immediately and ask an infant born just 7 days about life's source. Such asking leads to life when what is first becomes last. United, they become a single whole. Wow. Now, why is Jesus inviting us to go to a 7-day-old infant to seek the source of life? Well, it's interesting because on the 8th day, Jewish parents were required to hold a naming ceremony for their child. On the 8th day, they adopt an identity. On the 7th day, it's pre-identity, pre-labels, pre-names. On the 7th day, they are still living in absolute wonder about the source of all life. Wow. A couple weeks ago, I was in BC facilitating workshops for this national research program that I support. And at the end of the workshop, we gather in a circle, all these researchers, these academics, right? Who don't even like gathering in circles, actually, because they have to face one another, right? But we do it anyways. And we debrief the workshop. It's kind of a thing I make them do. And I ask them how they're feeling about the day, which is tough for them, right? On this day, one of the staff people of the research program is on maternity leave. She just had a child the week before, about 10 days before. And so she came to the end of the workshop and had her 10-day-old child with her. And I, of course, asked to hold the child for the debriefing. So I'm standing in this circle of academics holding this child, this infant, and something changes in the circle. It's not the usual gruff rumbling and trying to express their feelings in academic terms. There's a softness that happens in the circle until someone finally asks, "Can I hold the child?" So of course I passed the child on. As soon as this woman took the child into her arms, and she wasn't a mother, but as soon as she took the child into her arms, she said, "Wow, I'm home. I'm home." A person of advanced age must go immediately and ask an infant born just 7 days about life's source. Why do I think the Gospel of Thomas is so important? Why do I think it's come to us just at the right time for those of us trying to leave the age of belief and move into the age of spirit? Because we forget. We forget who we are. We forget the great connection each and every one of us has to the source of all life. We forget, beyond our identities, beyond all the ways that manifest our uniqueness, there is a depth of unity that descends to the ground of love itself. Jesus says, "If you give birth to that which is within yourself, what you bring forth will save you. If you possess nothing within, that absence will destroy you." Wow. These are prophetic texts. They're not simple or easy texts. Salvation, or rest, Thomas describes it as rest. It's a beautiful word for salvation. It's when we come to a place of peace and no wholeness, no sense of integration in our living. He calls it rest. If we give birth to that which is within ourselves, it will save us. Salvation or rest or the experience of wholeness is manifestly connected with the knowledge of our true selves, our origin, our source, and that inner work is a requirement to become adults in the world. It just is. And it's not easy work. But when we do the inner work, we know rest. We know wholeness. When we repress that, when we are afraid to go within, we create alienation, entropy, decline. We live unconscious and are cut off in the process to life itself. I know I don't have time, but I'm going to share this anyways because I think it's kind of important. This week in the U.S., we went through this confirmation hearing with Judge Kavanaugh. And so much has been said, and I don't want to go there, and our heart, I think, is breaking at what happened on the one hand, and yet we have to honor the fact that another woman's story was told. And once it's told, it becomes part of the community. And once it's a part of the community, it cannot be repressed. It will not be repressed, and we have to trust that fact. But here's what I noticed when reflecting on the Gospel of Thomas about Judge Kavanaugh. This wasn't a trial, so the whole idea of guilty or innocent, there was no space to create that verdict. This was a job interview, right? This was about character. And so Dr. Ford's testimony spoke to a character, and Judge Kavanaugh had an opportunity to give birth to what was within him in that moment of his testimony. but he failed in his opportunity. He would not go within. I'm not asking him to say, I'm guilty, I did it. But wouldn't you have liked to have heard him say, it was high school, and I was an immature male, and our culture was sick, and we didn't know how to treat or respect women. And I've learned from that. I'm willing to go within and at least honor that reality. I want to be a judge that serves our country, and I'm willing to look at the light and the shadow within me. Just give us a moment of sober second thought, not to put a pun in the middle of a very serious situation. But just a moment to pause and reflect. If you're going to shape the laws of a land for 30 years, have the courage to see what's birthed within and to bring it forth, that you too may be saved, that we may be saved, that we may know rest. This is why I think that Thomas is so important for our contemporary day. Here's your homework, because I can't take any more time. I chose the simplest one possible, so you can remember it. This is your homework for the week. It's no longer, in the age of spirit, it's not about experts up here. You know, it was the age of belief. We're the experts, we're just going to tell you what to believe and go home. In the age of spirit, it's us together. We practice together, and so this is your practice. Just take it with you for the week. Come into being as you pass away. Live with it. Why do I think the Gospel of Thomas is so important? Because I think it is so critical for all religion to move out of the age of belief and to fully into the age of spirit. There are no creeds, no doctrines, or no dogmas that can deal with the world that we're living in. Thomas Burton said, there will be no peace unless there is peace among religions. Religion needs to go within to seek redemption in the 21st century so that we can live the spirit of love and compassion and justice that Jesus first brought to the world. Has dogma or doctrine ever taught us how to love? Has dogma or doctrine ever helped us to understand how to be compassion, to welcome the stranger, to live in wonder? It's practice. Practice in the place of community. Practice in the place of community with the sacred teachings from the source of all life and all love. What a gift. And in the process of that practice, we become Christian communities not worried about the right things to say or the right things to believe or who is in and who is out. We become the practicing community of radical hospitality and a deep and life-giving spirituality and a community that embodies compassion and seeks justice. Does that sound familiar to you? That's because Hillhurst is a community of Thomas. May it be so among us this day. Amen.